All right, guys, so this set of notes for video is going to be about writing the equation of sorry, my cord's in the way here. Writing the equation of a trig function or a periodic function when you're given the graph. All right, so at this point, you guys should know how to find an amplitude, a period, and a midline. And you guys have graphed these before, so now we're just going to, basically, we're going to work backwards. All right, and then since we know that the general equations are going to be right here, okay, if I just write one of those down, this is going to hopefully be helpful, where A is your amplitude, right? In order to figure out where B comes from, it's always 2 pi over B, and that's going to equal the period. And then C is always the vertical shift, but it's also the midline, okay? So that being said, let's just go through the first one. At any time you have any questions, make sure you write them down on the paper that's in front of you, and then ask your teacher. All right, so if I scroll down just a little bit here so I can see the graph, okay, how I basically do this, I look and try to find the midline first, okay? So what would be a line that cuts this in half? Well, if it goes up to 2, why is my pen not working? It has a height of 2, okay, and then down to -2. So if we cut that in half, it's basically at 0. So my midline then is going to be at 0. Why is my pen tweaking? All right. Here. So now we have the midline's at 0. So I'm just going to go up here and write y equals 0. Okay, but also remember, whatever the midline is, that's also like the C value, okay, in our general equation. Okay, since I have a midline drawn in, I can easily pick out the amplitude. The amplitude is always how far above the midline it goes or how far below. So as we can tell, it's going to be 2. So we know basically our A value, come on pen, our A is equal to 2, all right? And then the period, well, if you look at the graph, first of all, to figure out, is it sine or cosine? Okay, you know it's going to be a sine graph because it starts on the midline, okay? You have one full cycle above the midline, one full cycle below, and it ends back at the midline, which is at pi. So the period is then at pi. Okay, so right now, if I had to clean this up just a little bit, this is not fun here. So A is 2. Now B, the easiest way to do this is to say 2 pi divided by the period. So if I have 2 pi divided by pi, then B is going to equal 2. Since my midline is 0, that means C is equal to 0. Okay? So if I go to write my equation now, I just say, all right, my f of x, which is y, equals A. We know it's a sine because it starts on the midline, ends on the midline. Oh my goodness, come on, pen. All right, my sine. And then my B value is 2. It's supposed to be right at 2x. And then plus the midline, which would be plus 0. I'm not going to write that in here. You can, but I'm just going to leave it like that. So there is our answer for the first one. Hopefully this pen gets a little bit better as we go. All right. Scroll down or go to number 2. Okay, hit pause. And then before you hit pause, try to actually figure out the amplitude, the period, and the midline. Okay, so go ahead and hit pause. Okay, so as you come back, we look at this. So the height of it goes to 2. The furthest down it goes this -2. If we split that in half, right, our midline once again is back at 0. So my midline is y equals 0. Therefore, c again is 0. The period, since my midline is at 0, we have to figure out what kind of graph is it. Well, since the midline's here and the graph doesn't start on the midline, it starts above, okay? That means it's going to be a cosine, and it has an amp of 2, and the period then goes, I'm going to say it's from this peak, it ends at the peak, which is a distance of 6. Come on, man. All right, pretend this pen works. Okay. All right, so now that, all right, I'm just going to hit pause here and try to fix this. Still having the pen issue, but whatever. So since amp is 2, then I know my A is equal to 2. Since the period is 6, my B then, I say it's 2 pi divided by 6, which would then reduce to pi over 3. Okay. This is absolutely killing me. All right, anywho. All right, and then since midline 0, C is 0. That's all we need to write it. So we're just going to go y is equal to, or f of x is equal to, the amplitude cosine, okay, of b, which is pi over 3x, and then plus the midline, which is 0. So I'm not going to write that in there. Okay. Going to number 3. Okay. So let's notice, definitely there's a vertical shift in it. It goes up to a height of 2.5, and the lowest is going to be at 1.5. So my midline is then here at 0, at 2. So I'm going to write y is equal to 2. Okay. My amplitude then is how high above the midline or how far below, which is a half. Okay. And then my period, which starts on the midline, so therefore it's a sine graph. Once half it's above the midline, the other half is below. So it ends here at 4 pi. So my period is 4 pi. Okay. So now if I try to figure out my equation, A is equal to a half. B is equal, it's always going to be 2 pi divided by the period of the graph, which is 4 pi. Therefore, B is equal to a half, because the pi's will cancel and then 2 over 4 reduces to a half. And since the midline is y equals 2, the C value is also 2. So now if I go to write this out, f of x is equal to my amplitude. It is a sine. My B value is a half of x plus 2. Okay. Hit pause if you need to, go back or rewind it, whatever. All right, I'm going to go down to number 4. Okay, so for this one, notice it goes up to a height of 5 and the lowest point is 1. Therefore, my midline is going to be at 3. So if I draw in my midline, okay, I'm going to go back up. So my midline is going to be y equals 3. Okay, therefore my amplitude is 2. The period, now, since on the midline this graph starts, it's a negative sine graph. And remember, a sine graph, half it is above the midline, the other half is below. It's going to end at 2, right? That's where this thing ends. So the period is then 2. Therefore, A is equal to 2. Come on, man, please write. Okay, remember, in order to figure out B, it's 2 pi divided by the period on the graph, which is 2. So B is equal to just pi, because the 2's will cancel, and then C is equal to 3. Pretend that's a 3. All right, but just remember, since from the midline it goes downward, you know it's going to be a negative value. Amplitudes are always positive, but negative tells us the direction. So f of x then is going to be a negative 2 sine, right? And then the b value is pi. So I got pi times x plus the midline, or the c value, which is 3. All right, go ahead, hit pause, try to do the last two. Okay, or do number 5 and then check your answer. And I'm running out of time here, that's why I'm kind of going to speed this up. So go ahead, hit pause. I'm going to write my answer, and then when you hit play, you'll see it. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you have the exact same thing I have, right? So always start with finding the midline. I saw that it went from 1 to negative 5, which is a distance of 6. So if we take half of that, which is 3, you could then go 3 down from the peak or 3 up from the lowest value. Either way, you get a negative 2. So I drew in my midline. Then if you count up to the peak or count down to how low it goes, that's the amplitude of 3. Okay, and then the period, it's always 2 pi divided by the period on the graph. Since this is a cosine graph, it starts at a peak and then ends at a peak. Okay, that's how I knew it was cosine. And then I just say, all right, for the b value, it's always 2 pi divided by the period. And if you reduce that, because the pi's will cancel, okay, then you're left with 2/3. Then you have your a value, your b value, your c value. Write the equation. All right, go to number 6 to finish this thing. Okay, so if you notice, the highest point is at 0.5. The lowest is at negative 2.5. Not that my pen is working again. Great. So mark down negative 2.5 up to 0.5. Okay. Therefore, that's a distance of 3. Half of 3 is then 1.5. So from this lowest point, I'm going to go up 1.5. And my midline is then at negative 1. Okay. So my midline is y equals negative 1. So my amplitude is then 1.5. All right, so looking where the midline is, and my graph is going to start down here and end here. So it's a negative cosine graph with a period of 4. All right. So A is 1.5. B is equal to, come on, man. Tell you what, I feel like there's going to be some issues here. Why don't you just hit pause and then try to finish this. Okay. All right, so go ahead and hit pause and then try to finish it and then check your answer. Remember, if you have any questions, always ask your teacher the next day. All right, so B is then 2 pi divided by 4. So therefore, B is equal to pi over 2. Okay. And then since the midline is negative 1, C is negative 1 as well. All right, so if I write my answer, negative 1.5 cosine pi over 2x minus 1. Yeah, buddy, we're done. Yeah, of course it does that. All right, great, thanks.